Hi everybody, we are going to do some science now, and we're going to be looking or sort of drawing some conclusions from our investigation, and we're going to be evaluating it and looking at how well we did and what we can take from this and take forward into future investigations. So I want you to quickly just to recap what we did in our investigation last time, what we were looking at. How did we investigate it, or how did we test it? How did we collect any of our results? Have a think about it. So we conducted our investigation into levels of friction. The majority of us used a ramp and some form of ball, and we did some. We had different surfaces, and we had a look to see how far the ball rolled. Some of us used different objects and how far do the objects move. Some were smooth, some were rough. And we were looking to see if the amount of friction varies depending on the different types of surface, so which surfaces have more or less friction. We made a prediction, we collected our results, and what I also want you to do, I want you to think about, would you consider our investigation to be fair? And what does it mean to be fair? And I want you to have a think about what you might have learned. And don't worry if you're not sure, I'm going to go over and explain some of our vocabulary in just a second. So if you're not sure what they mean, don't worry. Hopefully at the end, you should be able to meet these points. So let's have a look. We have a little vocabulary check. So I've got some words here. We've got our fair test up here. So a fair test, we can have a look at that straight away. A fair test to make sure our results are valid. That should say sure. Make sure our results are valid. We're making sure that we only change what we meant to change. And we need to make sure everything stays the same. It's really, really important for our test to be what we call fair, so that our results are valid, so we can rely on them, so we haven't got any results that are wrong. And we control if it's a fair test by looking at things called variables. Now, a variable is something that changes. It comes from the word vary. So when something varies, it differs. So we have three types of variable. We have an independent variable, a dependent variable, and a controlled variable. So have a think what they might mean. Pause the video if you want to write down and see if you're correct. So an independent variable is something that you change on purpose, and it's usually only one thing. So it's something you have chosen to change. And our dependent variable, as the name suggests, depends on our independent variable. When we're independent, a bit like being an independent learner, we're trying to work on our own. We don't need any other support. So our independent variable, we're choosing to change it, whereas our dependent variable is going to change because of our independent variable. And these are generally the things that you observe. This is normally the factor that we're going to look at and think, actually, yes, that's changed, so I've learnt this. I'll clarify all this in just a second. Controlled variables are things that you are choosing to keep the same. So if we have a think about some investigations that we might conduct, you might want to see, let's have a think. You might want to see which breed of dog eats the most food. You might conduct an experiment and you have different dogs, some food, you're going to see how much they eat. Your independent variable, something that we've chosen to change the type of dog. The dependent variable is going to be how much they eat, and the things that we control are going to be how long we let them eat, the time that we feed them, how hungry they are just before. So all of these relate. So what I want you to think about in terms of our investigation or your investigation, what is your dependent variable, what is your independent variable, and what are your controlled variables? Have a think about that. So, what do you think? So we've got our independent variable. What do you think that? What did we choose to change? We chose to change the type of flooring. That's what we chose to change. Some of you chose to change the object that you rolled. Your dependent variables, what were they? What were you measuring? What did you measure in order to say, actually, yes, that has more friction, that has less friction? For most of us, it was the distance that the ball rolled from the ramp. Some of you almost did a comparison. You looked at the difference between how far each of them moved. And what were our controlled variables? What did we have to keep the same? So for me, I know it was the height of the ramp, and I did that by drawing a little line, so I always lined it up the same. It could have been the type of ball. I always used the same ball. I always used the same ramp length. I used the same force of push. In fact, I even drew a little dot on mine, so I always placed it in the same place. The angle of the floor that I was on, because if my floor slopes downwards, my ball's going to roll further. And I also kept my tape measure. So these are some of the variables that I did in mine. Yours might be slightly different. You might want to label some of yours down with some subheadings. So, once you've done that, I want you to have a think about, was your investigation fair? Remember what it needs to be fair. Did we stick to all of these? Were our controlled variables as controlled as possible? So, if everything was perfect every single time, you might say, yes, it's an incredibly fair. It's an incredibly fair investigation. Whereas maybe actually you wasn't sure if you put the ramp at the same height. Now it doesn't matter if you say it wasn't fair. There is no right or wrong answer here. What it is it's the why that's important. You could say, I think that my investigation wasn't fair because actually I broke my ramp, so I had to change my ramp halfway through. You've shown me that you understand that it wasn't fair, and you've shown me that you know what a fair investigation is. So that would be a very good explanation of what happened. If you lost your ball halfway through and actually you had to change your ball and say, my results weren't fair because I had to change my ball, then that's fine. If you say it was fair because I kept my ramp the same height, I used the same ball, I pushed with the same force of push, then maybe that's true. It might be that you swapped pusher halfway through. Another way that you might say that, I think that my results are reliable, and you would use the same sorts of reasons. So it doesn't matter which one of these you choose. So this is talking about, is your investigation fair? I think that my results are reliable because I kept the height of the ramp the same and the ball was always the same. It's really important that these controlled variables stay the same or are kept constant, might be a very good way of putting it, so that my results are valid. So moving on to our activity. What I would like you to do is to do a little evaluation / write-up. Now I've got some sentence starters here. I've got, I set out to find, I did this by, I kept something the same because something, I changed something because something, it is important because I found out this means that the next time I conduct an investigation I need to consider. Let's have a look at this. Look, I set out to find, what did we set out to find? We were looking at the surfaces and the amount of friction. How did you do it? So here you might leave some steps. So I did this by conducting an investigation, and then you might bullet point some steps. You might number some steps. It's up to you. You might just write 1 or 2 sentences. Things you kept the same. Try and remember that technical name. What did you try and keep the same? They were your controlled variables. So if you can use some of that technical language that we used, independent, dependent, controlled variables, those sorts of things, fair test, that would be brilliant to see. I changed, what did you change? The type of floor, the amount of friction, because this is what I'm trying to test, those sorts of things. This is really important. Why is it really important? And actually you might swap these around. So you might say why it's important to change things, but you also might say why it's important to keep things the same. It's important that we only change one thing, so actually we know what we're observing. If I change 2 things, how do I know which one influenced my result? I found out that, what did you find out? You might be able to draw a link between how shiny something is and how much friction it has. You might have found that a certain floor surface had less friction. And what does it mean? It means that, I don't know, it might have more friction, so it might be a better material to use for flooring. It might look nicer, it might be shinier, I don't know. It depends on what you were testing. And this is the really important thing. Really, really important. This is where you're proving to me that you understand what it takes to be a good scientist. Next time, now that you've done this, what have you learned and what are you going to change? So next time I conduct an investigation, I need to consider or I need to make sure that I only have one independent variable, one independent variable, so that I can clearly observe the results. Next time I conduct my investigation, I need to make sure that all of my controlled variables are monitored. Next time I conduct my investigation, I need to remember to mark my findings straight away so that I don't forget them. Something along those lines. What are you gonna do better next time? And being able to identify our weaknesses shows me that you understand what it means to be a good scientist and to conduct a good investigation. So here's our tasks. For 1 chili, all I want you to do is just to finish these sentences and relate them to the investigation that you did. For 2 chilies, write them as a paragraph. Now you might lay them out differently. You might have a little box at the top, which was what you set to find out. You might have another paragraph here. You did this by. You might just have them in paragraphs. You might have a little bit where actually you've got your steps. You might have a little picture of what you did. Lay it out so it looks quite appealing rather than just having sentences. You're quite confident with writing sentences, so now think about how you're going to show your results in the best way that you can. I'm going to leave that open to you how you do that, because I think you can be really creative with some of these ideas, but try and make it really clear. And finally, write an evaluative paragraph and then suggest a different way that you can investigate friction further. So for that 3rd chili, I want you to do what 2 chilies are doing. So lay it out really nicely. Think about how you might lay it out. You might want to do boxes around some of them. Think about quite like non-chronological report style, those sorts of things. With the added, another way that I can investigate friction is to do it this way. I really look forward to seeing what you come up with. I really enjoyed looking through. Some of you have sent your results through. Some of you have sent videos through, sent pictures through. It looks like you really enjoyed this. This is just as important, this evaluation. This is where we're taking all of our learning and showing that we've learned something from that.